Welcome to the Deep Dive. We sift through stacks of fascinating sources to pull out the key insights, basically helping you get informed fast. Today, we're tackling a really profound paradox. We're living this time of amazing wealth, comfort, technology, unprecedented, really.
Wow.
And yet, at the same time, we're seeing this huge spike in mental illness.
It's quite striking.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Why? With all this progress, why are so many people feeling this?
Oh, well.
Well, some call it a crisis of meaning, and seeing rising rates of depression, anxiety, that kind of thing. The sources we're diving into today are really compelling. We've got insights from philosophers, psychologists, and even a pretty unique look at tribal societies.
A really diverse set of perspectives.
Definitely. So our mission today is to kind of unpack this complex tangle between modern society, our focus on individualism, and this basic human search for meaning.
Okay.
We want to explore different angles on what might really be driving the modern mental health crisis. So yeah, let's get into it. It's striking when the sources point out that, we have more access to basic needs, safer environments maybe, than our ancestors.
Sure. Materially.
Right. But then there's this significant, almost parallel rise in mental illness, kicking off really around the 19th century.
Yeah.
What do you think modernity itself, that focus on the individual, has to do with this picture?
It seems central, doesn't it? If you look at the big picture, one of the defining things about modernity is this intense focus on the individual self, its value, its power. We've really turned inward, haven't we? Become super aware of our own thoughts, feelings, or inner workings.
Right.
And this shift, the sources argue, has created a new kind of person, the psychological, someone who's really intent on understanding, maybe even mastering their inner life.
Okay.
But that raises a big question, What happens when that intense inward focus meets the really complex, often contradictory demands of modern life?
So if we're all hyper-focused on our own individuality, what does that actually do inside us?
Mm-hmm.
Especially when we're caught between, being me and fitting into what society expects or needs. Does that create a sort of tension, an inner split that fuels distress?
It absolutely can. And that leads us to a really fascinating, maybe even controversial perspective from psychiatrist Thomas Szasz. In his book, The Myth of Mental Illness, he pretty directly criticizes the psychiatric field for using mental illness almost like a metaphor.
A metaphor. How so?
He argues that these disturbing behaviors, the things often labeled as diseases like schizophrenia, they aren't necessarily illnesses in the same way a physical disease, like a broken bone or a virus.
I see. Saz's take is pretty provocative, isn't it?
Very.
Yeah, that famous line, something like, if you talk to God, you're praying. If God talks to you, you have schizophrenia.
Yes, and if a man talks to the dead, he's a spiritual. If the dead talk to him, he's schizophrenic.
Right. He's really hammering home that, unlike a physical problem, mental illness often gets judged based on social norms, ethics, legal standards, stuff like that. What's the core idea he's getting at?
Well, what's crucial here is that Szasz isn't saying people don't suffer or that these behaviors aren't disturbing. They clearly are. But he suggests that slapping the label disease on them can actually obscure the very real problems in living that people are grappling with.
Problems in living.
For him, breaking social norms isn't just a symptom of an illness. It could actually be someone's attempt, maybe a clumsy one, to face life's difficulties head on. He's really pushing us to think differently about what we even call illness, to look beyond just a medical label to the deeper human struggles underneath.
That's a really challenging idea. Makes you question the categories we use. And speaking of challenges, the sources also talk about modern freedom, this almost dizzying freedom. Sartre's idea that we're condemned to be free, meaning we have to carry this huge weight of freedom, of responsibility, without any external guide or predetermined meaning.
Yeah, no safety net.
So what happens then when someone just can't handle that much freedom?
That's a critical question. What does happen when their freedom feels more like a burden? Kierkegaard talked about two main traps, essentially. You can get lost in the infinite. That's like analysis paralysis, right? Thinking endlessly about all the possibilities, but never actually doing anything.
Yeah, I think we all know that feeling.
Or the opposite pitfall, getting lost in the finite, becoming just an imitation, a number in the crowd, blending in completely. Kierkegaard called this finitude's despair. It sounds a bit like a kind of depressive state born from not living authentically. And you can connect this to Albert Camus's idea of the absurd person, someone who sees the, quote, ridiculous repetitions of daily life and just accepts their fate, their Sisyphean condemnation.
Like pushing that boulder up the hill forever.
Exactly, just facing the absurdity without flinching, but maybe without real meaning either.
So if the things we do, our daily grind, don't connect with a deeper why we exist, we're basically set up for an existential crisis. And the sources point to the Enlightenment here, suggesting that by questioning traditional religion, it kind of pulled the rug out from under people's feet regarding life's meaning.
It left a vacuum for many.
Yeah, which connects straight to Nietzsche Nietzsche saying God is dead, that really forced the terrifying question onto the table. Okay, so does existence have any meaning at all?
And it's fascinating how Viktor Frankl responds to exactly that, this existential crisis, this existential vacuum. Frankl, who survived the concentration camps, mind you, he believed that this unheard cry for meaning is really the root cause of a lot of the increase in mental illness in modern times.
Really? He linked things like depression and addiction directly to that?
Directly. He saw depression, aggression, addiction, all these widespread issues as fundamentally rooted in this struggle to find purpose. So his whole therapeutic approach, logotherapy, it's all about helping people reorient themselves towards finding their meaning, their purpose.
Not just a nice to have, but essential.
Absolutely essential. He argued that striving for meaning is our primary motive, not just some idle curiosity. He had that powerful quote, "Each man is questioned by life, and he can only answer to life by answering for his own life." It's about responsibility for finding powerful stuff.
And this deep dive also brings in Carl Jung, whose ideas offer another really potent way to understand these inner struggles. Jung believed that real therapy often starts by exploring what he called a wholly personal story, the patient's secret, their unique narrative, the hidden parts.
Right.
He always stressed that the problem isn't just the symptom you see on the surface, it's always the whole person. His take on things like schizophrenia sounds quite different from the standard view back then, and maybe even now. What did he find? He treated patients diagnosed with schizophrenia and discovered some actually had, what he termed ordinary depression stemming from trauma or really tough life events.
Yes, exactly.
Can you tell us that story the sources mentioned about the young girl? It sounded really striking.
Absolutely. Jung's work really suggests that sometimes what looks like severe psychosis might actually be maybe fragmented but rich inner coping.
A way to deal with unbearable reality.
Precise. He realized you can't just analyze the conscious mind, explore the So this story, an 18-year-old girl traumatized by her, she retreated and said she was living, and Jung worked with her and discovered this whole fantasy world wasn't just random delusion. It was her carefully constructed, her way of fleeing the unbearable.
So the psychosis was her protection?
In a way, yes. Her way of preserving some part of herself. And this kind of work highlights how crucial it is to face our own darkness, develop both strength and it's tied to that whole process of maturing, moving from dependence to independence, like the classic hero's journey.
That story really hits home. The power of our inner narratives, even the unconscious. Okay, so shifting gears slightly, we've talked a lot about internal struggles, meaning the psyche, but what about our environment, our need for connection? Sebastian Junger, in his book Tribe, makes this really compelling case that we humans have this deep instinctual need to belong to small group tribes.
That sense of belonging.
Yeah, groups that historically gave us purpose, understanding, support. But he argues this connection has been, quote, obliterated in modern society. What happens when that core need is unmet?
Well, what's fascinating are these anecdotes the sources bring up, really stark comparisons. You had European settlers who were captured by Native American tribes, and often when given the chance to return, they refused. They preferred the tribal life.
They didn't want to go back.
Many didn't, but conversely, you apparently never had tribespeople wanting to flee to modern society, not one.
That really makes you think, does, about what we call progress.
It does. It suggests we're maybe genetically wired, evolved to live in these interdependent groups, where everyone has a vital role, where survival depends on cooperation, which fosters a kind of innate equality and shared purpose.
So while we might think modern life, with all its gadgets, gives us more free time, more leisure, Junger suggests the opposite is true. He describes it as a desperate cycle of work, financial obligation, and more work.
Yeah, the hamster wheel.
Right. And we're still sort of hardwired to be hunter-gatherers trying to navigate these huge, complex societies. Which leads to that feeling. Maybe you felt it. Being surrounded by people and yet feel completely alone.
That sense of alienation is profound, and it really underscores how modernity has disrupted these vital social bonds. Look at the sociologist Emil Durkheim. He even noted that shared hardship, like wars or natural disasters, terrible as they are, sometimes had positive effects on mental health rates.
How could that be?
Because in those moments, people pull together, they devote their energy to the community, they set aside self-interest for the collective good.
I see.
It suggests a deep lack of that kind of community, that shared purpose in our everyday modern lives. Something tribes naturally provided.
We're missing that cohesive glue.
Exactly. And this loops back, in a way, to Jung's warnings. He felt humanity is pitifully unaware of our unconscious. He suggested modern people have become too rational. We've lost touch with our deeper primitive and this leads to a kind of dissociation in the psyche, modern, a split.
Too rational. That's a powerful thought, that our rationality could be a disconnection. The source is, quote, Jung saying our rationalism has destroyed our capacity to respond to numinous symbols and ideas. What exactly are numinous symbols, and how does losing them put us at the mercy of the psychic underworld? That's ominous.
Numinous symbols, for Jung, are those images or ideas that resonate deeply within us, beyond just logic. They feel sacred, mysterious, powerful. Think archetypes, deep myths, symbols that connect us to something bigger than our individual ego. His point was that by prizing only rationale, sort of cut the phone line to these vital unconscious parts of ourselves. And when we do that, we become vulnerable. At the mercy of the psychic underworld means those repressed parts, the shadow aspects, the collective unconscious force, they can start running the show without us even realizing it.
Because we're not consciously engaging with them.
Precisely. We think we've gotten rid of superstition, but Jung argued we've actually lost vital spiritual values, lost them to a positively dangerous degree.
So this kind of moral spiritual breakdown,
yeah,
that's the cost of being disoriented, dissociated. The Jekyll and Hyde example they use really illustrates that split, does this unconscious, spontaneous splitting of the personality, not something Dr. Jekyll chose.
Exactly. It's a perfect metaphor for this modern dissociation. And it connects to losing touch with nature, too, with animals, trees, the non-human. Ernest Becker made a related point, a really stark one. He said, when a tribe loses its sense that its way of life is meaningful, is worthwhile, they might just stop reproducing or even just lie down and die. His point being, food is not man's primary nourishment.
Food is not man's primary nourishment. What is that other nourishment? The one modern society seems to be starving.
It's meaning, it's connection, purpose, belonging, a sense that your life, your group's life, matters in the grand scheme of things. Without that spiritual existential nourishment, even if you have plenty of food and shelter, there's a profound starvation happening. A starvation of the soul, you might say. That intuitive link to nature, to myth, to community, that's the nourishment we've neglected.
That makes a lot of sense. So if this dissociation is a real cost, what's the path towards healing? How do we mend this split in ourselves and maybe in society? Jung points towards exploring the unconscious, right? Through self-reflection, paying attention to dream.
Yes, acknowledging that there are these other parts within us, autonomous personality, understanding that our collective unconscious holds these ancient primitive aspect. His key point was that we've been so obsessed with what we think that we completely forgot to ask, what does the unconscious psyche think about? We need that dive.
What a journey this deep dive has been today. Really profound stuff. We started with that paradox, modern comfort, yet rising mental illness. We questioned what illness even means in this concept.
Challenge the standard definition.
Exactly. Then we wrestled with the weight of total freedom, the existential vacuum, and how crucial finding meaning.
Frankl's core mess.
Right. We looked at Jung's ideas about our personal stories, the power of the unconscious,
the hidden narratives,
and finally the huge impact of losing that sense of tribe, of community in our modern world.
Junger's point about belonging.
And, these aren't just abstract ideas floating around, are they?
Not at all.
They speak directly to the pressures we all feel, to our own search for purpose, our craving for real connection. Understanding these different viewpoints can give us powerful tools, not just for understanding the world, but for understanding ourselves.
Absolutely.
So maybe the final thought for you, our listener, is this. Given everything we've talked about, our deep need for community, for meaning, in a world that often pushes us towards individualism and pure rationality, what small steps, maybe intentional steps, could you take to reconnect with your own sense of why, or perhaps to start building more meaningful tribes, connections in your own daily life, something to reflect on?